Malcolm, is there really a split between yourself and your former leader, Muhammad?
No, I wouldn't call it a split. Everything I know, I was taught by the Honorable Elijah Muhammad. Whatever I speak, I'm speaking that which he has taught me. And whatever position I've attained as a Muslim, I've attained it through his guidance and through his help. But during the 90 days that I've been silent, I have come to the conclusion that I can best help spread the solution and the diagnosis that the Honorable Elijah Muhammad gives of the so-called Negro problem in this country by continuing to remain out of the Nation of Islam and working on my own without restriction in the way that I think I best know how.
In mid-December 1963, the suspension of Malcolm X was extended indefinitely.
That we will do everything within our power to bring about the complete control, political control, of Negroes over their own community, over the politics of their own community. And our economic philosophy, which is also black nationalism, is designed to show Negroes the importance of controlling their own economy. When Negroes are re-educated into the knowledge of how to set up businesses and establish factories, they can create their own employment, and then they won't be running downtown trying to boycott the white man or sitting at the white man's door or force him to give them a job. We want to try and show the Negro with the economic philosophy of black nationalism that he can house himself, clothe himself, feed himself, and do something for himself. And the social philosophy of black nationalism is to teach, again, it involves the re-education of Negroes. I hope I'm not talking too fast for you, but I can't help it. The social philosophy of black nationalism is to show the Negro how to take some pride in his own society. How, instead of trying to force himself into the white society, how to elevate how to elevate his own society and get some racial pride, racial dignity, so that he'll be socially acceptable to himself in his own society, and then perhaps he can get along better with other people in other societies. Make the city or state or government, which takes our tax dollars, channel some of these dollars right back into the Negro community and establish better schools in the Negro community with better teachers, with better curriculum. And one of the most important ingredients in that curriculum must be the culture, the lost culture of the Negro. So some effort must be made to restore the cultural roots of the Negro in the school system where Negroes attend.
You seem to have had a change of heart in your attitude toward Negro leaders in the civil rights movement. What position are you taking now?
Well, I think that the problem itself is so big that all of the so-called Negro leaders should try some way to forget our differences. I'm willing to forget anything that any Negro leader has ever said bad about me, and as I said earlier, I am praying that they will also be able to forget the many bad things that I've said about them, so we can sit down and try and find some common approach that can be used to solve this problem that's of common and mutual benefit to all of us.
After his break with the Muslims, Malcolm broadened his scope to include the international scene, and it was at this point that his life was threatened. In April 1964, Malcolm made a pilgrimage to Mecca. Here, at 39 years old, he received the name El-Hajj Malik El-Shabazz, the honorary Hajj being given to all who visit that Muslim holy city. From Mecca, he journeyed to Nigeria, Ghana, Morocco, and Algeria, finally returning to the United States May 21, 1964.
Malcolm wanted to galvanize public opinion against the United States for its oppression of black Americans and to get African support in bringing the American racial question before the United Nations. To do this, he needed the support of independent African states. And so in the summer of 1964, Malcolm returned to Africa for a 4-month tour of 14 countries. In his autobiography, Malcolm notes that he was followed throughout Africa by persons from an unknown source. One of them was described as, quote, a thin-lipped, olive-skinned man.
On July 23, 1964, Malcolm was in Cairo, Egypt, to deliver a scathing attack of Washington's domestic and foreign policies in an address before the African Summit Conference, when he collapsed in his hotel room with severe abdominal pains. According to Eric Norden, in an article, The Murder of Malcolm X, Malcolm was rushed to a Cairo hospital, suffering from toxic poisoning, and had to have his stomach pumped. Malcolm later said he had been deliberately poisoned. Throughout the fall of 1964, Malcolm worked primarily on his plan to indict America in the United Nations. According to Eric Norden's information, Malcolm had been under surveillance since he broke with the Muslims, but now there were as many as, quote, 3 different agents shadowing him at one time.
In early February 1965, Malcolm flew to London to address the Council of African Organizations. From there, he was scheduled to fly to Paris to deliver another speech. However, on February 9th, when his plane landed in France, he was told by agents of the French government not to deplane, and he was ordered to leave the country immediately. Later, Malcolm was to say, according to Eric Norden, after an interview with Malcolm's sister, that his being barred from France led him to believe that the plotters of his death were much bigger than the Muslims.
On Saturday, February 12th, Malcolm returned to the United States by route of London. 10 hours later, at 2:45 Sunday morning, the home in which Malcolm, his wife Betty Shabazz, and their 4 children lived was firebombed. The house was severely damaged, although Malcolm and his family amazingly escaped unharmed. In an article entitled "The Last Days of Malcolm X," Earl Grant said, quote, "Evidently, there were several degenerate persons involved in this cowardly attack. The one in the rear had lost control of his flaming bottle and dropped it. Had this bottle been thrown into the house, Malcolm and his family would have been trapped."
On February 20th, he called a business meeting of his new group, the Organization of Afro-American Unity. That night, Malcolm stayed alone in a 12th floor room at the New York Hilton Hotel on 53rd Street and 6th Avenue. His family had been put up by friends in Queens, New York. A man later identified as Thomas Hagen, one of Malcolm's assassins, would be identified by a Hilton Hotel house detective as one of 3 black men asking questions about the location of Malcolm's room the night before his death.
The next morning, Sunday, February 21st, the day of his murder, Malcolm left his 12th floor hotel room, got into his blue Oldsmobile, and finally parked his car a number of blocks from the Audubon Ballroom, where his organization's meeting was to take place. He entered the main ballroom about 2:30 p.m. Shortly after 3 p.m., approximately 400 people had crowded into the ballroom, sitting on folding wooden chairs. One of Malcolm's aides introduced him.
The New York Herald Tribune, February 22, 1965, reconstructed what happened from eyewitness accounts. The applause stopped, and the people sat down, and Malcolm's goateed face looked up and he said, "Assalamu alaikum." And the crowd murmured its response of, "Peace be with you also." And then the 2 leadoff men made their move. They were in a middle row, and they stood up and started pushing each other. And one of them was saying, "Get your hands out of my pocket. Stop messing with my pocket." Malcolm's bodyguards started to move towards them to break it up. And up on the stage, Malcolm stepped out from behind the lectern, and he was saying, "Now, brother, break it up. Let's cool it." He stood there, alone on the stage, with one hand up in the air, and he was a perfect target. And a man, police say he was Thomas Hagen, ran down the aisle with a shotgun, and the ones with him were already shooting, when the shotgun was right in front of Malcolm X, and both barrels raked him. Malcolm went straight back, and the sound of his head slamming onto the wooden floor was mixed with the screams, and he lay on his back on the stage of an old ballroom. Peter Bailey, an associate editor of Ebony magazine, was a member of the OAAU and worked closely with Malcolm X. He was at the Audubon the day of the shooting. That same day, he wrote his immediate reactions to what took place.
I was in the rear of the ballroom, sitting and waiting at the entrance for the speakers who were expected. After hearing 4 shots, I ran into the main ballroom, looked up front, and saw nothing but confusion. The place sounded like a battlefield. I then dashed back out with a group of people running towards me and ducked into the bathroom at the side to avoid the shots. Immediately after hearing the last shot, I ran out of the bathroom and down the center of the totally wrecked hall to the stage. Jumping onto the stage, I saw Brother Malcolm's lying on the stage floor with bullet holes all over his chest. I leaned over him and saw that his skin was already getting that deathly look. There were several people administering to him when I got to the stage. I went into the room where others were holding his wife. I said that someone had gone for the doctor, not knowing whether this was true or not. I then jumped from the stage and started to the rear of the hall to see if the doctor was on the way. It was almost 3/4 of the way down the hall that I saw the first 2 cops that I had seen, and those two were just casually walking to the hall as though they were on a Sunday stroll. This despite the fact that people were still screaming, crying, and the place looked like a battlefield.